is that they derive and maintain their body temperature purely from external sources. They need to keep the temperature range between 70 and 79 degrees. If they fail to do so, anything that they eat, and they do eat primarily at night, it would fail to be digested and they would die. So here's what's happening. Up until about 5 weeks ago, there's the Batman pose, one of those that he was talking about. But up until about 5 weeks ago, our daytime temperatures was in the 60s, our nighttime temperatures was dropping into the 50s. In those days, the alligators almost all were out of the water during daylight sunny hours. That's the only way they could control and maintain their body temperature. Well, now that we have seasonably warm temperatures, our daytime temperatures are in the mid-upper 80s and low 90s, our water temperature is in the high 70s and low 80s. The alligators not only don't want to come out of the water, they frankly can't come out of the water and spend much time in the sun because they would get overheated. The downside is that we see fewer alligators, and those that we see are primarily in the water. Now in the nighttime, I wouldn't want to be out here at nighttime, frankly. That's when the alligators get active and aggressive, but they would be out of the water hunting and doing their thing. Also, very early in the morning, you're more likely to see them out. But this morning there was one out on one of the platforms, the first one, if you will. And since then, we saw one baby out of the water. Female and Ingo flying across the front of the boat. Now this pathway to the right is the same pathway that you came down to the boat dock on. It does go all the way around the 125-acre former rice fields. It's about a 1.2-mile walk should you care to walk it. It would take a little over an hour to do so. Now I like to tell people, if you walk our paths long enough, or if you walk our paths frequently enough, you almost certainly, at some point or another, are going to encounter an alligator on the path. My suggestion is always the same.
There's one.
Leave the alligator a wide berth and simply leave it alone. Almost as certain is the fact that if you get too close, the alligator is probably going to run or flee, because again, during daylight hours especially, they're much more afraid of us than we are of them. Now, that said, I'd like to add, alligators can run 14 miles an hour for up to 70 feet on land. They can swim through the water at 10 miles an hour, and they can launch half of their body out of the water with one swipe of their tail. So if you happen to get just a little too close to that one alligator that's in a particularly bad mood, you may have a hard time getting out of his way. Now the experts tell us if you're being chased by an alligator, you need to do the zigzag pattern. Something about the zigzag pattern confuses the alligator, and he's at least more likely to give up the chase. I, on the other hand, prefer the old adage. If you're going to be chased by something like an alligator, you need to be running next to something or someone that runs slower than you do. Now this is still the Ashley River off to the right. Remember I told you it's a brackish tidal river. We are 12 miles from Charleston's harbor. And that means we do have aquatic saltwater sea life up here regularly. We will frequently see porpoise jumping out here in the river. We have shark, we have all kinds of saltwater fishes. The alligators at nighttime, again, when they become active and feed, will actually cross over the levee, go out into the Ashley River and feed. It makes a very good hunting ground. And that's the adults. The young ones don't cross over the levee. Now, this is no longer fresh water either. It is mostly fresh, but we don't control it because we're not growing rice here any longer. On exceptional high tides, we do get backflush from the river, so we do have brackish water in here. The fish that we have in here are plentiful, and they're mostly freshwater. In It's all naturally occurring. We do not stock it. It takes care of itself. I'll come back to that in a minute. This is a great heron, or sometimes people call it a great white heron.
Hey, look, the penguin.
It has a yellow beak and black feet. It has a cousin, which is about half that size, and it has just the opposite, a black beak and yellow feet, and that's a snowy egret. This is a egret, excuse me, a great egret, or sometimes called a great white egret. Its companion or cousin bird is a smaller version called a snowy egret. And the egrets and the herons do exactly what this guy's doing for the better part of their day. They're fishing. They wait very patiently until they see something swimming by in the water, and you wouldn't believe how fast they can react and dive in and grab a fish, a crab, or whatever it is they're hunting for. Yeah, we've got enough people on the boat that you're going to get a little water coming up, so nothing to worry about. Now, if you look straight ahead, the path to the right, again, is the same one that is you came down to the boat dock on. You could take a hard 90-degree left here, and that would take you back to the boat dock. If you went straight, the path would take you back into the center of the plantation, and that's where all of our paths do eventually lead. There's another great egret off to the right of the path over there. Now, on the other side of the path, straight ahead, you're going to see what was a former smaller rice field. And that's what would have been the case during the rice producing era. They would have had smaller fields adjacent to and surrounding this, the main field. The idea being that should the levee breach, you wouldn't lose your entire crop. Oh, back here's a, this is a snowy egret. See the difference? It's got yellow feet and a black bill instead of a yellow bill and black feet. Oh, thank you. Right on cue. That's a snowy egret. Rice cycle began in February of each year. And that's when the male slaves would go out into the field using sickles and machetes, and they'd cut down any growth that came up over the winter months. Then they would light it all afire and burn it all down to ash. Then in March they would flood the field with an inch or two of water, large mud basin. And then in April and early May, the female slaves would use a technique brought with them from Western Africa called the mud dance. And that's where they would scatter the rice seed down onto the mud and then use their feet to compress it further down into the mud. And then late May through August was spent every day, all day, weeding and hoeing, keeping the field free of weed. And then in September came the actual harvest. Now, at the peak of the rice era, which was 1750 to 1780, South Carolina was producing about 80 million pounds of rice annually. 50% of that rice was being shipped back to England, and it was the long grain, higher quality rice which the English preferred. They preferred it so much they actually paid a bit of a premium for it, making it very profitable. The Carolina Patriots, the plantation owners gave it the name Carolina Gold, not because of its color, but because of how profitable it had become. It made Charleston the richest city in America during the peak of the rice era. Now, we're oftentimes asked if there is still any rice being produced in South Carolina. The answer is yes. There are two small plantations north of here, up near Georgetown. It's a very small, scaled-down operation, which allows us to see how it was done in the old-fashioned manner. It's a very high quality rice. It's packaged and sold throughout the region in gift shops and specialty stores, and it's sold and marketed as Carolina Gold. Now when I got here, I had to do a lot. I didn't know much about rice. I had to learn, and I was very surprised to find out that today the U.S. is still a major producer of rice. States of California, Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas produce 76% of all U.S. demand for rice. And if you can imagine, as you would imagine, that's a whole lot of rice. Now, it is not done the old-fashioned way. It's done with automated irrigation and machinery and what have you, but we still produce a lot of rice. I was telling you about the gates, the water gates, and the water trucks back at the dock. What I didn't tell you is that there would have been 25 to 30 of them scattered along the Ashley River through the levee, here to your left. There's a great blue heron up on top of the tree to the hard left. Hard left.
Oh, yeah, look at them.
I'll come back and tell you about the gates in a minute. I'm going to point out there's a palm tree straight ahead on the bank. Straight ahead, front of the boat, has a round dome top. That's called a palmetto palm or a palmetto palm tree. Again, it's up on the bank, it has the top, the big rounded dome top. A palmetto palm tree. Those trees are very important with regard to South Carolina history. Number one, it is our state tree. Number two, its image is found on many of our numerous license plates. But its most endeared place in history came as the result of its role played during the Revolutionary War. In June 28, 1776, an English admiral named Peter Parker, and note that's not Spider-Man, but an English admiral named Peter Parker brought 9 English warships in off of the Atlantic Ocean headed towards Charleston with the intent of taking Charleston. What he didn't realize was that we had a small fort at the north entrance to our harbor. It was then called Fort Sullivan, and today it's called Fort Moultrie. That fort was constructed out of the logs harvested from the palmetto palm tree. The nature of the wood is that it's very spongy and dense. So the story goes that the English cannonballs were literally bouncing off of the walls of that fort because of that dense, spongy nature of the palmetto wood. They tell us further that the Patriots would go out periodically and collect those English cannonballs, take them back inside, and fire them back at the British. Now, not sure what part of that you want to believe or disbelieve. We do know it to be historically accurate, however. At the end of the day, Peter Parker did, in fact, raise anchor, set sail, and headed back to sea in defeat, leaving the Carolina Patriots with one of their first and more important Revolutionary War victories. Now I started to tell you about the water gates again. There would have been 20 to 30 of them scattered along the bank of the Ashley River through the levee. There would have been a slave positioned at each and every one of those gates at the time that they were going to open or close. And what they would do, there would be one particularly entrusted slave who was tasked with the responsibility of determining when to open or close the gate. And he did this by positioning himself on the outside or the riverside of the gate, and he would use a ladle to scoop out a ladle full of water every few minutes until such time that he detected salinity or salt. There's a snake bird right to the left here. You aren't going to see it now. When those birds are swimming, that's an inhinga, and it looks like a snake when they're in the water. I forget what I was saying.
Sample water.
The what?
Sample water.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, the gates, the water gates. So he would ladle out a ladle full of water every couple of minutes until such time that he detected salt or salinity, and he would close his gate and signal all the others to close their gates. Very simple technology, but very effective. I oftentimes will ask people